What binds the chaos of Donald Trump's presidency is not a hidden grand strategy, but the opposite, a vacuum at the center of power. Trump's defining political trait is not ideological commitment or even consistent self-interest. It is distraction. He is easily flattered, easily angered, easily nudged. And in a world of extreme inequality and concentrated power, that weakness has proven catastrophic. Into that vacuum have stepped some of the most dangerous actors of our age, people with rigid worldviews and vast resources who have learned how to steer a mercurial president toward their own ends. The result has been the systematic erosion of the post-war world order. Trump governs as if the presidency were an extension of his phone, open to whoever can reach him first, shout the loudest, or promise the most, unlike previous presidents whose decision-making was filtered through institutional discipline. Trump's process is porous and improvisational. Advisors, media figures, donors, family members, and ideologues all compete for his attention. Policy emerges not from deliberation, but from impulse, grievance, and deal-making. This is not strength masquerading as unpredictability. It is vulnerability at the top of the most powerful state in human history. That vulnerability has been exploited repeatedly. Trump boasts that he has ended wars, reshaped alliances, and imposed American dominance. Yet the reality is a scattershot foreign policy that has alienated allies and normalized lawlessness. Military strikes, regime change operations, territorial threats and economic coercion appear and disappear according to the last conversation Trump had or the last slight he perceived. The United States has come to resemble the very rogue superpower it once claimed to restrain. What makes this moment especially dangerous is who has learned to manage Trump best. Figures with disciplined ideologies, particularly those rooted in ethno-nationalism and authoritarian power politics, have thrived in his orbit. Stephen Miller, as the effective head of White House policy, exemplifies this dynamic. Long before Trump, Miller held a coherent worldview. Nations are defined by blood and force. Diversity is decay. Law exists to serve power, not to restrain it. Trump supplied Miller with something far more potent than ideology, an impulsive president willing to translate those ideas into state action. Miller's genius, if it can be called that, lies in his ability to channel Trump's resentments into policy while cloaking extremism in the language of realism. His rhetoric rejects international norms as niceties and elevates brute force as the governing law of history. This is not realism in the traditional balance of power restraint. It's a revival of 19th century imperial logic fused with modern surveillance and militarized borders. Immigration policy became the testing ground, but the worldview does not stop at the water's edge. A foreign policy built on strength alone inevitably targets weaker states, multilateral institutions, and the very idea of shared rules. Trump himself has no such intellectual coherence. He does not wake up thinking about demographic trends or civilizational struggle, but he is highly receptive to narratives that explain his failures as the result of betrayal by outsiders, foreigners, immigrants, allies, and internal enemies. That is why Miller's influence has been so profound. He provides Trump with a story in which cruelty is necessity and domination is destiny. A similar pattern appears in Trump's relationship with oligarchic power, most vividly embodied by Elon Musk. Musk is not a government official, but his wealth, technological reach, and cultural influence grant him extraordinary leverage over public life. In recent years, Musk has increasingly aligned himself with reactionary politics, demographic panic, and civilizational rhetoric that echoes white nationalist talking points, even when couched in the language of free speech or futurism. Where Miller supplies ideology, Musk supplies infrastructure, platforms, capital, and technological power. Trump, who has always conflated wealth with virtue, is instinctively deferential to figures like Musk. He listens to them not because they are wise, but because they appear omnipotent. In an age when AI, social media, and defense technologies centralize power at unprecedented scale, that deference matters. It allows private actors with radical worldviews to shape public outcomes without accountability. The fusion of state power and oligarchic ambition is no longer theoretical. It is operational. This is how Trump's distraction becomes a global threat. His presidency sits at the intersection of three destabilizing forces: ethno-nationalist ideology, extreme economic concentration, and unrestrained executive power, enabled by a compliant Congress and a captured judiciary. Trump has stretched the presidency beyond constitutional limits. Lawlessness abroad mirrors lawlessness at home. The attempted coup against American democracy and the willingness to overthrow foreign governments are not separate pathologies. They are expressions of the same belief that power justifies itself. The demographic obsession at the heart of Trumpism reveals the ultimate futility of this project. The America Trump imagines, a permanently white, culturally frozen nation, no longer exists and cannot be restored. Demographic change is not a policy failure, it is a historical reality. Even the most draconian immigration regime cannot reverse it. What it can do is shrink the country, age it, weaken it economically, and isolate it morally. A nation that closes itself off does not become great again, it becomes brittle. Yet instead of reckoning with this reality, Trump and his advisors double down. They promise higher birth rates, harsher borders, greater force. They mistake coercion for vitality. Abroad, this translates into a revival of spheres of influence, territorial threats, and contempt for international law. Trump's flirtation with annexation, his casual threats against smaller states, and his invocation of doctrines rooted in imperial dominance signal a return to a world where might is the only argument that matters. History warns where this leads. The post-war order, imperfect, hypocritical, but real, was built on the insight that unconstrained power produces catastrophe. Laws and norms exist not to weaken the strong, but to prevent their self-destruction. When those constraints erode, oligarchs, demagogues, and empires overreach. They provoke resistance, instability, and war. We are already seeing the pattern repeat across continents. Trump did not invent this crisis, but he has accelerated it. His presidency demonstrates how a distracted, manipulated leader can become the instrument of far more disciplined and dangerous forces. Stephen Miller's authoritarian ethno-nationalism and Elon Musk's oligarchic power flourish not despite Trump's chaos, but because of it. Together, they represent a convergence of ideology and capital that thrives in the absence of accountability. Civilization, at its core, is an agreement to restrain power, to protect the weak from the strong, and ultimately the strong from themselves. When that agreement collapses, nothing replaces it but force. Trump's legacy may be to remind the world how fragile that agreement is, and how quickly it can unravel when the most powerful office on earth is occupied by someone who can be so easily led and so disastrously used. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.